It's fine. I don't think well, I kind of handled it.
Thank you all for coming out tonight. Thanks to Nomadique for throwing such an amazing event. So we're about to hear the music of Ernest Cassutto, a Dutch Holocaust survivor. This piece offered, we know next to nothing about. We know it was found just recently in a garage in New Jersey. We know it's likely never been performed. And we know it's written in 1944. The year Ernest was found and captured by the Gestapo. The year his fiancée Hetty died in Auschwitz. The same year he miraculously escaped Rotterdam prison's last deportation with the help of an unknown angel who removed the star from his cell. We know about Ernest's story through his book, The Last Jew of Rotterdam. He took great care to give language to his story and to share it with the world and his family. We know that this piece sounds nothing like any of the music that he's written, and it sounded a little bit more like this. If I can get this. Oh, I have no words to tell how sweet you are. You're just like a rose in sunny spring. When I look at you and when I hear your voice, it's just as if I hear the sweetest music in my dreams. Oh, I have... So that's the song Ernest wrote, and he's playing with his brother George Cassutto after the war. At his home growing up, his mother used to dance in Charleston around the house to a hand-cranked phonograph machine. There was music all the time, and they would all gather around the piano and sing, and Ernest picked up a bunch of different instruments. In fact, we have the silver saxophone, which his dad gave him, on the condition that he would quit smoking for 1 year. He quit. We know that Ernest grew up in Indonesia, where his father was stationed at a law school as a dean. There was no synagogues around, really, so his upbringing wasn't particularly religious. He wasn't really aware of the fact that he was Jewish in a lot of ways, and until he moved to Holland in his teen years. And, of course, with the start of the war, where he was reduced to the yellow star he wore on his coat. We also know that Ernest became a Christian minister after the war. Ernest spent most of his formative years in hiding, underwater, as they would say, going from safe house to safe house. He probably made his way to 40 different addresses. And one of the things that transformed him to become a minister later in life was the love that he found from people in the Dutch resistance. People who would risk their lives to take him in, to shelter him, risk their families' lives. This is where he learned about what it means to be a true Christian, as he would have said. Let's see the next slide. Another thing about his religion, the fact that he called himself a Jew for Jesus actually connected him to a lot of people along his way throughout the war. He would knock on different doors and people would let him in right away. And in fact, there's this tremendous story from the book where he was captured, and anytime they captured a Jew, they would interrogate them and say, who protected you, who saved you,
what are the names that we can have? And Ernest refused to say anything, so he was sent to the torture room. And right away in the torture room, he got in a conversation with the Dutch civil police there about Jesus. And they got talking so much about theology that the torturer forgot to torture him. And his religion also later in life became the way that he met his wife, Ellie, after the war. We know of the horrors of war through our culture, through books and films, through the stories passed, and through our own families. We don't know the feeling of looking up at the sky, seeing parachuted men come down like giant snowflakes. We don't know the fear that accompanies such a sight. We can never know the individual stories of the people on the ground below them. My good friend Anna Dunsing knows the history of the Holocaust a lot better than I do, so I called her about this project right away when I knew about it. And she's in Germany right now on a Fulbright studying the Holocaust and post-conflict memory. So this is a good time to publicly thank Anna. You'll find in the zines they have downstairs, she included an essay specifically for this project. We've been talking back and forth for the past couple months, so I urge you to read that. And it's not about Ernest's story directly, but it's giving you the context, especially thinking about forgiveness. We know that Ernest himself struggled with the topic of forgiveness. One of the most hair-raising stories in his book starts with a phone call. So it's after the war, and it's a woman on the phone whose husband is dying of lung disease. And she asks Ernie, can you come to my husband's deathbed and give him his last prayers? It turns out this man is Herr Bartels, the commandant from his Nazi prison in Rotterdam. Now, earlier in that prison, Ernest had already resolved to forgive the Germans, or at least try. One of his only companions that he had in the prison and in hiding was the Bible. Another thing that he carried with him was this. This is a diary that his fiancée Hetty had sent through the Dutch underground, the couriers. And on the back of that diary, she writes, Ernest, we must pray for the Germans. They need our love so badly. So as an act of faith, Ernest goes to the man's house, Herr Bartels, and struggles to approach his bedside. And I'm going to read what happens. That's not technical. So I went to Herr Bartels' bedside and kissed him. Bursting into tears, he placed his white hand in mine, and I had the privilege of praying with him then and there for his salvation. Just before he died, he said, thank God you came. Thank God you said my last prayer with me. Thank God. Those were his last words. The Lord taught me one more lesson on how to love my enemy, and this time he had also taught my enemy to love me. We know that Ernest's story lives on through his family, who remembers the story of forgiveness with pride. After the war, his wife Ellie and Ernest decided to name their firstborn Hetty after his fiancée, who was killed during the war. I should mention right now that Hetty is actually in the audience with us tonight. And she's here with some of the other members of the Cassutto family. So we're honored to have them in the room. Along with the story that got passed down, we also know that Ernest's love of music was passed down through the generations. And that's where I come into this whole thing. So I sing in a local choir, and I sing with Ernest's grandson, Dean. And one day in December, we have a Facebook group, and he posted something on the Facebook group saying, my family just recently discovered this sheet music. Can anybody play it on piano for me? We'd love to hear it. So the first thing I think about is my own grandfather. And, he's the person who introduced me to music. And in fact, he was in World War II as an entertainer in Japan, but it just was a no-brainer that I was going to be playing this music. And when I heard about this show, I thought it would be a great time to get a group together and actually have a proper performance of it. We don't know what we don't know about the people around us every day. I would never guess that singing next to Dean for the past 4 years that we would have this type of connection, or that would inspire this amateur historian in me even. And the very existence of this book is really a gift. And when we think about the language of forgiveness, I think a lot of it has to do with just talking about it, about talking about what happened, about sharing your story. And, Ernest teaches us how to do that just by writing this. He teaches us how to bear witness to injustice, to tell our story, and to transform pain into something beautiful. So with that, I'd like to invite a string quartet up to the stage. Blanca Gonzalez on violin. Jason Mello on violin. Susan Mandel on cello. And Trevor New on viola. Just going to take a moment to tune up. Offer by Ernest Cassutto.